right, welcome to another episode of the IB Innovators. Today I'm joined by Jackson Moses, founder and managing partner at Silent Ventures. Jackson is awesome, operator turned investor. Before founding Silent Ventures, he built and scaled companies himself, living through the realities of, the GTM go to market, capital decision, and what it takes to survive, long cycles, hard customers. Today he backs, founding some of the most important technologies, across defense, aerospace, and national security. This isn't just about hyper headlines. It's about what works, what breaks, when startups try to build enduring companies inside the defense ecosystem. So, Jackson, thanks for joining me today. This is going to be awesome. Appreciate your time.
I'm stoked. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah. So, let's start with your background. Again, you didn't just wake up one day and go, let me do a defense focused VC firm. What was your path? What did you do early? And, how did those experiences drive you to founding Silent Ventures?
Yeah, I think that, I think David like focuses a lot around risk taking, which young folks, for better or worse, are kind of like waking up to the fact that they've ignored it for so long, right? So like in my 20s, I leave college and I was very excited to just kind of like try things, right? I mean, you got your 20s, there's very little downside risk to something not working out. And the next, several decades are on your side to kind of make things up in the event something goes catastrophically. So, I ended up at LinkedIn right out of college, which was a fantastic experience doing things in sales. But revenue for an enterprise SaaS company wasn't exactly, I think, how I wanted to spend the next 30 years of my life. And so I left and I founded two companies, one in the AI space back in the mid 20 teens, and then one in the fintech space, coincidentally, absolutely zero relation between one and the other. But that's where I really, I grinded my teeth. That's where I developed my battle scars. That's where all my the gray hairs on my beard formed.
Oh, come
I'm
on.
wearing a
Look at
hat.
this.
Eh,
You got
I
none.
like you were flying fighter jets though. That's understandable. For me, I was just trying to build something from nothing. And unlike you as well, I had very little hair under here. So I really kind of like I took my licks at my first company. Very mediocre leader, like a kid in his young 20s, but has some really fantastic people around me. And I attribute all the success of that company to others. Then the second company I did, a company called Main Street, fintech, again, kind of unrelated to AI, but got together with some really, really wonderful folks out of Google. And we built a $500 million company in like 2 years. And that was a rocket ship. That was really unique. I never experienced that hands on, and leading the revenue and go to market sales functions there was really fun. And like, that was during COVID too. So everything was remote. I mean, we ballooned to several hundred people all over, computers and Zooms. And so it was just, a very, very interesting. And like, to me, it looks completely nonlinear going forward, but like reversing back and, hindsight's 2020, each step that I took, although it was quite scary in the moment and there were plenty of unknowns, I got very, very comfortable with being uncomfortable, and that ultimately led to where I'm at now. So, building those companies, I was also exposed to like a ton of really great founders, right? I was exposed to some really interesting novel concepts. And I would say like the seed had been planted, at least at that time in Silicon Valley, for deep tech and kind of this aerospace stuff to, at least have like a very early level like foundational presence. It was still extremely non grata. No one gave these founders who are exceptional the time of day. Everyone was laughed out of an IC committee decision if you even got there. If the partners or the principals or the associates were willing to take the call. And so, I had the pleasure of working with some folks who are now really big names in the industry and very, very, very well deserved to kind of bring these companies to life. And so as I was building companies, I was also investing in companies. I went very quickly from being a generalist to focusing on aerospace and defense because I'd lost plenty of my own money making those generalist bets. For some reason, the alpha was stemming from aerospace and defense. There was something there that just it synced for me. And I mean, like, why fight gravity? Like you're talking about some of the coolest ideas. You're working with some of the most creative founders, and they're all very like they're truly mission driven. People talk about vision, mission, all that, all of that stuff, company culture. These people are like, I'm leaving money on the table. Like you can quantify it by going after like a space, a defense, a national security type business model, as opposed to something like generalist SaaS or AI or developer tools for which they have the capabilities to build something around there in the playbook. They're taking these unknown risks, betting on a future that basically is, hey, I want to help shape the sovereignty of the United States and make sure that this is protected, just like our great military men and women do that voluntarily with their service. There was this cadre of folks forming, not necessarily in the Silicon Valley, more so in SoCal and Texas, that said, I want to dedicate my entire operating experience to making sure that we're not speaking Mandarin in 20 years. And to me, I said, that sounds fantastic. What are you pitching? And the ideas were always next level. So eventually, after the two companies that I played a role in exited, I decided to stand up Silent Ventures, which, to your point, has a pure and centric focus on aerospace defense and national security at the earliest of stages. And then we continue to follow on in a very meaningful manner in companies that were extremely high conviction up until pre IPO. And this has been a lovely experience over the past 10 going on 11 years, very chaotic and anxiety ridden going into it. But now I look back and I'm like, I wouldn't have done it any differently.
Well, congratulations on 2 exits. That's not easy. So,
No, it's not, and again, like very much attributable to others, but happy to have played my role.
yeah, well, I mean, that's yeah. I guess now we're gonna get into the single founder, less than 5 people in the company that can get to a billion unicorn or something like that with AI, but generally, it is about the people, right?
Yeah.
And it's great. I think, I agree with you. I mean, that's why I'm doing what I'm doing. Having that mission-centric focus behind a company really changes the dynamics, just from the type of people you bring in, the way your culture is in the organization. So,
Oh,
um,
these people, I mean, these founders, these men and women, they're gonna fall on the spear to bring their idea to fruition. I mean, like, what they're talking about, this job is great because you get to see so many facets of the national security apparatus. You get to see the people building the underlying technologies that DoW will procure, or enterprise will procure in service of maybe subcontracting or contracting to a prime. And it all boils down to, like, the rights, the privileges, all of these things that we're afforded in the United States as a republic, people take for granted. They do. I'll say it aloud here. And there is again this cohort of folks that says there is a non-zero chance that down the line these things are very much put at risk and the world could look quite different. To which a lot of people just, it never enters their mind. They're understandably living their day to days, and they're narrowly focused on themselves, and there's nothing wrong with that. But you have these really just masterful, meaningful operators out there that have given so much thought to this, that say, I'm building the thing that solves this. And this thing X is critical in nature, and we need a response. And so when you work with motivated individuals like that, it makes my job so much more enjoyable. It makes sourcing deals, it makes meeting with founders, it makes evaluating them, I think, I don't know if easier is the right word, but much more rewarding, right? They're not necessarily in it for the money. They don't want the headlines. They don't need several articles written about them. They don't need a 100,000 person Twitter following. They just want to build, and that's been very absent in the world of venture for quite some time, in my opinion. So I really get to live my best days every day, and I get to do it with people that are looking for the same.
yeah. Well, I'll tell you, even from my podcast, I'm not a podcaster. I'm the COO and co-founder of cyber defense company, but I have the same thing. I love doing this because you hear so many cool ideas of like, you're trying to do what?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, like, literally, like, did I hear that right? Or, like, you read a deck and you're like, I call it plausible science fiction. Like,
Yeah.
maybe, like, I really need to look into this. I really need to diligence it. But if it works, it works. And only in a place like America can innovation truly, truly, again, I like to say, all things even in the world, if that were the case, we have an absolute monopoly on innovation here in the States. Yeah, I mean, that's a function of a lot of things, but what we get to see and what we get to evaluate, it really does look, not just futuristic, but almost implausible at times. And that's a really cool facet of the job.
Yeah. Well, also, I think it's awesome, you've been an operator, you've done this before, now you're taking those skills and rolled in. Do you miss that? Do you miss operating vice being more the guidance guy, the good idea guy, the get this shit started
Yeah.
guy?
I will preface this by saying, I think I have plenty of very good ideas. And then I talk with other people and I learn that maybe like 1 out of 100 is actually a good idea. I'm definitely an ideas guy, but who knows like the actual wisdom that comes from them. I do miss operating to a degree. I think, I think serial founders and those who just generally enjoy not just working but thriving in the startup ecosystem, they have this mentality that I really do believe you're kind of born with. And it's kind of like it's kind of like a screw loose mentality. Is I like to tell folks, especially if I'm working with like concept stage founders who are, to your point, seeking guidance and trying to figure out, okay, how do I navigate the early stages of formation and corporation, right? Who should my early hires be? Like, these are people who haven't done it before. That's very fair. They don't know what they don't know. But I like to tell them, like, hey, if you don't have 5 to 10 years ready, to devote to this 16 hours a day, everything else is a lesser priority in life. You should stop now, right? And it's not meant to be harsh. It's meant to save people like a lot of painful experiences, because you've done this, I've done this. I mean, if I knew at the start of my first company how I would feel 3 months in to building that company after raising money, I'd have been like, I really need to reconsider this. Like, this is a massively, massively complex set of emotions that I'm feeling. And again, I'm getting no sleep and like my health is all over the place. I think if you shared that with the general public, they'd be like, you're insane. Nobody should do this. Like the founder journey. There's a reason you don't see tens of millions of billionaires walking around. Building something from nothing is darn near impossible. And it requires a very unique founder art operator archetype. Myself, I'm really like a 0 to 1, 1 to 10 guy. I think there are plenty of folks that you could hire beyond me to scale at 10 to 100 and really put that structure into place. I'll be completely honest there. I enjoyed the chaos of 0 to 1 and then kind of beginning to normalize that in the 1 to 10. Some of my best experiences and my most memorable experiences just from my time in the startup ecosystem, including my time as a venture capitalist, some of my best experiences were like, walking around with a single fire extinguisher when like 100 things are on fire. And you're trying to prioritize not just what is most important, but also, okay, out of that stack of what's important, like which one then am I going to apply the fire extinguisher to? Because the other 99 things are going to burn, and I just have to be comfortable with that.
Right.
I talk to others and I say, like, this job in a CEO or COO or, just a founding team member role is akin to walking over a hotbed of coals while chewing glass and smiling the entire time. And, there are some people that just really like that. And those are the builders. Builders love to build, and that's why they keep doing that. For me, I think the founding of Silent Ventures and formalizing that institutionally was my way of building something new in the defense tech ecosystem where I could be a quote unquote founder, although the founder operators are far more exceptional than myself, and contribute my skills to this entire kind of like American dynamism movement. Like we realize things are askew. They have been for decades. It's just there's more eyes on them now. And folks like myself and others have been trying to solve them for 10, 15, 20 years. Some have been trying to solve them since, the early 2000s. And I take a lot of pride in that, but I also realize that I do not have the chops to found, to create, to build something of value as a defense tech entrepreneur. So I play my part in the stack, and that is as an allocator. And so I'm a quote unquote founder of my firm. But don't get me wrong, all the hard work is being done by others. That's a long-winded way of me saying every now and then I think and I dabble and I try to quantify and understand, okay, like if I launch back into this, like how different does my life become? And of course I have obligations that kind of prevent me from doing that. But it does mean that, I really love interfacing with founders, be they in my portfolio or be they just general, members of the defense ecosystem. Everyone is trying to make the United States and the Western world better. They all have that shared philosophy. And so for those folks, especially if they're military veterans, I have all the time in the world, right? Good people around good people result in good things. I mean, it's osmosis. So I get to kind of scratch that itch by, taking all the learnings from the operator side, but then also, a decade of learnings from the investment side. And to the extent my founders want, advice or counsel, I'm able to share my 2 cents. They're not always right, but they provide data points that founders can, collect and then pattern match against, and maybe that is somewhat insightful or helpful. I will say, Dave, is like we don't at Silent, we don't really we attract and we work with founders who are pretty well sculpted from day one that don't require a lot of hand holding. And as a specialist firm, we don't pronounce to do a million things right. And so we usually find very solid alignment with our founders in what they need and whether or not we can deliver on that. And then we're able to diligence, prior to any form of investment, is this the type of person or a set of people that we're very comfortable backing? Because sure, they might need some assistance at the margins, and that's what we're here for. That's part of our value add. But we're not going to build a company for someone. And so if there's some, I've rambled about go to market, government contracting, things like that before. I won't waste your time here. But there are some parameters where if we're not comfortable, we won't back a certain founder type. And because of that, I also find myself in situations where I'm often learning from my founders, right? And that's fantastic. It's an exchange of ideas, it's an exchange information flow, and it collectively, I think we're all better for it. But I do kind of, my life is more stable now. I do kind of miss the days of absolute chaos.
It is, but there's risk, right? You still have LPs you're reporting to, and teams. So there's
When I say, Dave, that this is easier, I mean relative to founding a company.
right.
Being a VC, especially a solo GP, is not easy. There's a lot of stuff that we juggle. How well we juggle, I think, is that's a spectrum that people fall on. At Silent, I think we do a pretty good job. And my LPs, I hope, would attest to that. But it pales in comparison, as you know, to being in the trenches and building something hands on.
That's great. Let's step out a little bit just so listeners can hear. What is your thesis? And money is green, so is all green the same, or what do you bring as that value that's different than just someone else that's writing a check?
So I love that. I mean, we to be clear to the audience, it's like we didn't script this beforehand. Is like we do not believe all money is the same shade or hue of green, especially in defense. And I would say that this is true for biotech or any serious specialist sector. And coincidentally, I do think biotech and defense maybe are the most analogous in nature. You know, you can take generalist money, you can take platform money, you can take money that's not silent ventures money. I think founders need to evaluate and calculate how good of an early stage partner any firm, and especially the partner on the deal, is going to be to them. And if it's from a bigger firm, like, are those partners going to be around 1 2 3 years? Because it's a very fluid ecosystem, right? And people are making moves, and that's all the better for them. But that creates some uncertainty for founders and companies that are raising from the earliest of stages. So we don't believe all money is the same hue of green. For us, our thesis really comes down to this: is that, I guess, more philosophically, humans have always disagreed, right? We have agency, we have, our own ethos, and we have the ability to act. And, over time and historically, and I'm not one to argue with history, I'm not one to argue with math. Like, there are plenty of instances of different, ways of thinking, different cultures kind of permeating in different areas of the world, and eventually coming to a head, right? And our preference is not that that's militarily, right? Like, our preference is that things are solved diplomatically. But, and as we see now with Iran and Israel and the broader Middle East coalition forming against Iran, as we've seen over the past several years with, I don't know, not just the CCP and China's global aggression, but instability in whether it's Cuba or Venezuela, like these state actors acting on behalf of maybe more of an Eastern Eastern set of principles, that doesn't mesh with our way of life. And, the Monroe Doctrine is a thing. And it's really, really important that we provide ourselves and our allies the means to which we can uphold our way of life, not just defend and preserve, but really proactively negate any threats. And so our viewpoint is this: is the NDAA, for your listeners, the defense budget more broadly, and that whole reconciliation process is one of the most bipartisan efforts in the United States. It's very politically savvy to go against any form of cuts in military spending, especially because our troops, our servicemen and women, they deserve the absolute best of the best. As we've seen under administrations, both Democratic and Republican, that number keeps going up and to the right. We're at a little give or take $1 trillion now. The Trump administration has indicated they want that to be about 1.5 trillion in the next year or so. We're of the mindset that we'll probably hit 2 trillion, with, again, with the added caveat here is I think it depends, obviously, the next executive branch, which party holds power there. But by 2030, it wouldn't surprise me if we're around 2 trillion in defense budget. And we see allied countries, whether it's, NATO, or whether it's AUKUS, or Japan, South Korea, kind of undertaking these same structural imperatives, right, that have kind of been absent from, I'd say, the Western world in general for quite some time, because it hasn't been a generally volatile place. And because of that, we think that, again, although soft power is our preferred way to resolve any conflict and violence should be out of the equation, we're also realists in the sense that soft power without the implicit threat of hard power and asymmetric capabilities just turn into prolonged multi-decade conversations where nothing happens. And so we want to enable our operators to build the systems and platforms that DoW needs and that our warfighters deserve, that give them an absolutely undeniable battlefield advantage. And so that's where we invest. The things that we do well, to your point, like, not a generalist firm, we're specialists. We know defense really well. We know the national security apparatus, and aerospace and space tech, things adjacent to that, are quite interesting to us. We like to work with our founders on seeing around corners, preventing mistakes before they happen. Ultimately, what we're trying to accomplish from the VC side of the equation, right, is minimizing time to exit and making most efficient use of dollars invested through us and others on behalf of our LPs. And so we like to take kind of the collective institutional knowledge that we have and assist our founders in, maybe, or mitigating what could be 6 to 12 months, and preventing that type of delay and decay internally, and making sure that they have as smooth a journey as they can. But on top of that, we are very good at understanding the contracting apparatus. Again, whether that is the Capitol Hill side of the equation, whether that's HACD and SACD, whether that's the ads, then the appropriations and the blocking, whether that's the presidential budget, right, and reconciliation, and actually moving towards an approved authorization, or whether that is how all of these things translate into the world of DoW, and the Pentagon, and contracting vehicles, and how to, over several years, position and move towards a program of record. These are things that we like to work very closely with our founders on, because if you don't have a program of record in defense tech, even though this is a very frothy ecosystem with a lot of dollars coming in, you're not a multi-billion-dollar outcome. You're just not. And we're realistic about this, so we try to be realistic with our founders. So we help there. And then, we're very fortunate to work with exceptional partners, because we work at the pre-seed and seed stage. We have a whole host of really great kind of, individuals, again, from 10 years ago that we were in the trenches with, that now run exceptional firms. And they themselves are exceptional people who are also domain experts. And so we like to make the whole journey from pre-seed to pre-IPO as seamless as we can. And luckily, those really close, what were business partnerships that have now turned into very good friendships, allows us to pass our companies to really respected institutions and people, and make that journey, especially on the capital markets front, as seamless as possible. Because no one wants to spend 2, 3, 4 months fundraising. And so that's our thesis. That's how we bring value. And we found that really resonates with the market.
That's great. And so you mostly invest in seed? Is that where you kind of focus, or where is your?
Yeah, I mean, the nomenclature's all over the place, right? Some of these rounds are absolutely massive, and it's like, yeah, that's a seed, but really was a Series B. So we invest at pre-seed is where we will
Okay.
lead. Sounds
So
goofy to say
pre-revenue, basically.
pre-revenue concept stage, sub 15 to $20 million valuations, and we will deploy large amounts of capital into those founders that are looking for a long-term enduring partner that knows what they're doing. And then we will follow on and we will either co-lead or lead seed rounds in our companies that are highly performative. At Series A, we hand our companies off to a set of investors that are very very good at what they do at the late early stage and into the mid stage, and that's where they make a market. And we've had nothing but a track record of extreme success there and really good outcomes. And so we operate wholly at the beginning portion of the capital stack. We will follow on selectively as we see fit with certain companies, whether that's, the Saronics of the world or the Castellians or the Hadrians. I mean, luckily there's a whole cohort that is now following in the footsteps of Anduril, and we're fortunate to have good relationships with those founding teams. So that's a little bit more mid to late stage. That's certainly not where Silent makes a definitive market. We dabble, but yeah, pre-seed, following the seed, that's where we find that we have an unfair right to win.
Awesome. Let's zoom out a little bit and talk just more just general, market. What's the single misconception that I would say, we'll call them civilians, but or even traditional tech investors have about defense tech that stands today?
I have two answers for you if that's all right.
Perfect.
One tends to be a misunderstanding, a fundamental ethics qualm or misunderstanding of just the philosophy of defense tech. And so, broadly speaking, like even just several years ago, a lot of venture funds that you now see very actively participating and overcapitalizing, I would say, these markets had vice clauses in their LPAs, which, again, for viewers, just like, again, investors raise money from limited partners. Those limited partners sign an agreement with us. And that agreement, amongst other things, says what you can and cannot invest in. For a lot of LPAs, especially of larger deployers, anything that smelled of military capability was off limits. You couldn't use LP dollars to invest. Hence, your fund was going to exist for several years without any defense tech exposure. I won't speak broadly to the allocators out there, right? But Silent Ventures is very, very fortunate to have limited partners that see the world for what it is. They don't live in ivory towers, they don't look down upon others, and they don't engage in this truly irrational, have my cake and eat it too kind of ethos of, yeah, I love the world that I live in, and I love that I'm retired, and I love that I have hundreds of millions of dollars, and I love that I can say whatever I want to say, and this, that, and the other. But also, that has nothing to do with the fact that we have a very capable military who protects and upholds our rights and ensures that those privileges afforded to me are not violated. And there's like such extreme cognitive dissonance there. It is petrifying. It is seemingly amazing, astounding, quote unquote. Some of the smartest people in the in capital markets in the United States are either completely ignorant or they're beholden to other forces. So, we've seen that mismatch. I would say it was much more significant several years back. I would say now it is balancing and an equilibrium is being achieved. There are some folks that will never touch defense tech, and that's okay. Defense tech doesn't want them. There are others that have truly taken, maybe a different lens, a different perspective to the world we live in, the problem set that we face, and the founders and the opportunities that present themselves, and have, put it on their plate to learn more about defense tech. And those who say, "Look, I'm getting smart here," of course, there are those who use that as an out. But then there's quite a few who, rightfully and to their credit, have gotten smart, and they're now active participants, and I applaud them. So I would say that bifurcation in general is kind of odd, but thankfully it's kind of reconciling naturally, organically. I think especially as limited partners realize they're missing out on just absolutely insanely high return profiles. But hey, I'd like to think more of them have taken more of a patriotic stance and want their dollars not only supporting military servicemen and women, but protecting America and her ideals more broadly. I would say the flip side, themes and themes in the defense tech ecosystem, dual use. Dual use, I mean, it's everywhere. And you know what? I think dual use is I said this in a different, I think it was a panel with one of my buddies that we were doing, is like dual use is a dirty word. And I say that meaning this is that I think all companies that work in defense tech, may not all, many, will be long-term dual use companies. It's sensible to me that if you start out as a single use company selling to government, that if you create a solution to a problem that is good enough for Uncle Sam, and that problem permeates the private sector to any degree, that you can create a derivative business line and product set to then sell to the private sector, right? Similarly, if you're, and I like for instance, I think Palantir has done a great job with that. But similarly, if you're focused by selling to commercial markets first, maybe you're subbing and these are B2B contracts, or maybe you just take a commercial first enterprise approach and that's what your solution's for. Well, if you capture like, a good portion of that market, then it would make sense that if again the problem set related to defense, related to national security, probably has legs with TOW as well, and it would be foolish then to not capture that long tail and that revenue and opportunity set and create a product that is emblematic of what DOW needs. And so dual use to me is this funny thing because you see and you hear it thrown around a million different ways. And I've seen actually a lot of my peers kind of start to diversify away from that and say like, oh no, we'll do pure play, like single use. Or I think it's really important as an investor who has built before, that you have a singular focus, business model and go to market wise, at the earliest stages of company building, right? And you've seen this, Dave, right? If you can't just keep raising money for a plethora of ideas that come in and a business model changing or pivoting every other
Yeah,
month.
you have to stay focused. You're going to get slaughtered.
Exactly. Yeah, you're getting slaughtered. So, for us, dual use is for those who don't know what they're doing, it's a hedge word. It's optionality. It's, hey, this company can be a commercial outperformer or a government outperformer or both, and we're going to look brilliant. For us, we look at it more as which side of the equation are you going to tackle first? Is it government or is it commercial?
Don't you think that was driven by, because I agree with you. I think it is incredibly hard to have two completely different markets to go after. The use cases, yeah, there may be a line and the technology could transfer, but to create a business, to get your
Mhm.
go-to-market alignment, product market fit, aligning that is tough. But all these SBIRs came out years ago, and
Yep.
that's where they started this dual use concept is, and it's a head for the government is I'll give you money, but I gotta know that you have something here before I invest it. And so I think that's where it came. Do you know? Did you hear of it before SBIRs or?
No, no, I think structurally you're correct, right? Is this the government hedging its bets? Now, there's a bigger question around how goofy that is because of the minuscule amount of dollars that they allocate to SIBRs and STITRs. There waste, fraud, and abuse. If we just took that amount of several $100 billion and applied it to the defense tech ecosystem, we'd be leaps and bounds ahead of where we are now. And so it's a little bit of a marketing gimmick. It's a little bit of a tactic. I get that our bureaucrats and our elected politicians have to do a little bit of CYA. Long story short, and you know this well, is like procurement and acquisition with DOW is broken. It's getting better, but we're not building the next, the next Neo Prime to replace a Lockheed or a Northrop Grumman off of Saber dollars. Like and VCs that know this game are not funding Saber mills. It's just grants are not a way to build a long term enduring valuable business. And so there are definitely some VCs, and you raise a very good point, who leapt on this and created a thesis around it and very much I'd say adhere to the non-dilutive financing of the non-dilutive dollars spiel. And our view on this is quite different, is that we think that you are to raise money in capital markets, right, from traditional funding platforms, VCs in this case, once you've achieved a semblance of product market fit and you want to engage in hypergrowth. At Silent, Okay, if one of our portfolio companies gets a SIB or a STID or a direct to phase two, makes to a phase three is a big deal. And I think there's a whole misconception about basically the nomenclature, the numbering, and the dollar amounts around SIBRs and STIDers. But more generally speaking, it's like, okay, that's nice. Like, but our focus with our companies is how are you going to go lobby for line items in the defense budget? Right? How are you going to structure and create a pathway to an OTA or a funded IDIQ? Right? These very serious demand signals that allow for then the progression towards a more material program of record. And so we're comfortable deploying in companies that have that. Actually, we prefer to deploy in companies that have that mentality coming out of the gate, and we will continue to invest in them so long as they're executing along that roadmap. And if they never raise, let's see, if they never receive a SIBR dollar or a STIDR dollar, we don't care. Now, that's our opinion.
Yeah.
The flip side is, to your point, yeah, you can engage and embrace the entire dual use mandate. You can relate that to SIBRs and STIDRs. That is one way of investing. We could be completely wrong in the long run. Others could be right. There could be some middle ground, but we largely avoid that. But I think to your point is it is structural. Like there is a reason that VCs index on that, and because it looks like a de-risking element that again was put in place by Uncle Sam as CYA for activities that they're engaged in.
Yeah, and I don't think, there aren't many companies that grew and became something through SBIR funds or stitters. It's
Yeah.
now there are some that have traction and the market fit with the government aligns. They didn't have to change roadmap, they didn't do anything, and they were able to get just because some extra funding that increases runway,
Yep.
or allows for acceleration of deployment of capital. But yeah, it's hard. But again, you look at the other side, I think you bring a great point. Like your idea of for folks that are trying to go government first, you need to get in the lobbying action now. You got to be close with your customer. You got to figure out how to get that dollar moving. Otherwise, you're never going to get across quote the valley of death.
And I don't think, Dave, to your point is like I don't think, and all this lingo and all these models are intertwined. Is I don't think SIBRs and STITRs are actually the correction to the valley of death. It's just prolonging the valley of death. You're
Yeah.
still going to end up dead if you don't make the changes, and if you don't
What
make
you're
the
going to do is
progression
you're
that
going
was
to
just
kill a
outlined.
couple. You're killing thousands of founders. I mean, again, it's good capital. I think it could be used differently, but and I applaud the trying to accelerate the innovation train, which it has, and some are continuing on because their alignment is very close to what the government needs. But to chase, funding like that, I've got plenty of friends and just companies we've seen. It just crushes them. All of a sudden
Yeah.
they're not, Congress didn't fund the next round of, SIVers.
Yep.
All of a sudden they're like, lay off half the company. We're done. Like that is not a good business model to scale.
No, you don't. Yes, CRs. I like to say, don't hedge your bets with Congress. Like, don't. Hope is not a tactic, right? Hope is a terrible strategy. If you're hoping for Congress to do the right thing for the defense industrial base in appropriating dollars and carrying out its basic functions, as we can see now with like DHS funding, for instance, then that is the wrong side of the bet to be on. It's probably the most absolute bet that you can make that it will not come to fruition. And to your point, you get hit with a CR, and then we're operating the government on back to back CRs. We keep prolonging payment of obligations, and these companies that played exactly within the rules and the guardrails that were set by Congress and the Small Business Administration are are screwed over. They have to lay off people. They aren't receiving their funds. There's churn inside of these departments, and so their point of contact might be gone. And now a new point of contact. It takes several months to backfill, but they have different priorities. And so there's also, for as safe as SIBRs and STITRs look at the at face value, there is actually a lot of underlying complexion to them, and there is a very high concentration risk that you run afoul even by playing the game that USG wants you to play.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, let's keep moving because we could talk all day. I have a feeling. So you're a 0 to 1 guy. What do defense tech founders need to get right in year one that most of them get wrong?
It hits on exactly what we were just talking about. Go to market. Everything is go to market. I like to say this is like defense tech it's usually not an arbitrage of like a net new opportunity, right? It's yeah, we see super creative stuff, don't get me wrong. Definitely in space tech, definitely with regards to deep tech and energy, there's legitimate new technologies being built. But defense tech is an arbitrage of three things. It's an arbitrage of price points, right? It's an arbitrage of lead times, and it's an arbitrage of output, the volume that we can create. And so a lot of these plays are, in my experience, folks that are improving upon previous or existing products that are usually constructed and contracted by defense contractors. And usually implementing again like a design framework, a first principles approach of how do we build this again at a price point that is fair to the taxpayer in volumes that actually solve for magazine depth and breadth and allow the United States to carry out its operations without any bottlenecks. And so with that mentality, I state that because usually you're not having to hire, say, like an SME in a very unique vertical to build something new. You're trying to hire CTOs, right, COOs, and CEOs that have been there, done that, and can have the product chops to build anything and hire really great teams. That's usually covered in my conversations with folks. These are men and women, that were early Anduril, or they've been at SpaceX for 10 to 15 years. Like Palantir, they were there as the 200th employee, something like that. They helped orchestrate the playbook that so many others use. And now we're seeing again like an emerging class of these companies and in Stronic and Impulse and Hadrian and others that have just been doing phenomenally. They can build. Now, the question I always have for my founders, and those that I diligence is, how are you achieving a program of record? It's a very broad question. It's intended to be that way because there are several vectors to reach a program of record. But I need to understand from the CEO, how are they going to navigate the millions and millions of variables contained with that very complicated motion of reaching a program of record, defining it, of working with the program office, the executives, all the sponsors, and blocking so that, one of the incumbents doesn't come out of left field and say, actually, this was structured for us, or it's no longer sole source, right? Or something like that. Or a new requirement was just thrown in that, surprise, surprise, only Boeing has the ability to fulfill. And so I want to hear from my founders, how are you going from A to Z? And I get a lot of really interesting responses. Sometimes they're not traditional, and that's okay. But I need to know from founding teams, and I think what most founding teams underestimate is the importance of revenue motions. I think VCs are kind of done, the good VCs, those that have been doing this for a while, specialists are done funding science projects. We ourselves and the platforms don't have necessarily the patience or the tens and tens of billions of dollars required to fund science projects for 5 years before there's any meaningful monetization. And so, for founders listening to this podcast, for founders out there contemplating whether or not to get into defense tech, and for operators, what is it that they need to do right in the first year? Like, what is it that they might underestimate? It is go to market functions, and whether that is engaging lobbyists, right? Which is I'm not a fan of that ecosystem, but it exists, and that's how things work on Capitol Hill. Hopefully 10, 15, 20 years from now, with the rise of these neoprimes, we can change that. But, how are you working with lobbyists? How are you working with recruiters or within your network to hire, say, a head of BD or a head of government relations? And how does that person or those people, how do they play the game and how do they know how to play the game? And if I just don't receive the necessary indicators that a founding team has an understanding of that, the business to me is uninvestable. And so first year is you really do have to not just have the roadmap and the plan for how to execute towards a program of record, but you need to be able to action it. And action doesn't always mean that you're monetizing within the first year, but that the roadmap that you've outlined, you're hitting your milestone achievements and you're progressing towards the capture that is absolutely critical for a defense tech company to thrive in the United States.
Yeah, that's great. Well, man, time is flying. We're gonna wrap up here with a lightning round, to
Oh,
kick
okay.
off.
Okay.
So just give me your initial thoughts. Some of it you may have already, hit on, which is fine. Just a quick comment, but 5 questions. What's the most common mistake you see defense tech founders make?
Under budget and underestimate the consequences of time. So, raise a little extra buffer, prepare for the worst because government is unpredictable, and for better or worse, you're tied to their actions.
Yeah, don't want to fizzle out under capital. Finding the end of the your runway is not a good place to be in airplanes or with capital.
Yeah, that's very true.
What do you wish more founders understood about raising capital for defense?
Alignment with the venture firms they're engaged with, and specifically the partners. This is a long-term journey. A lot of these exits, if successful, will be 10 plus years. Make sure that you have the support network in place from day one, and don't just expect things to work after you've raised money. Do serious, like serious checks, serious inquiries into the GPs and the firms that have offered you term sheets or want to participate, and critically evaluate who is best for you.
What makes you say yes to a defense tech investment like at the first meeting?
We've never done that, but hypothetically, it's the founding team. It's the intangibles that I've learned from being an operator myself, having hired tons and tons of people, and having been in this business now for over a decade. Is probing and understanding by proxy someone's acumen and their willingness to bring something to fruition for the right reasons. That's 90% of the equation for us. The founding team, who they are, the archetype, what their skill set is, and importantly, their character and integrity. And if we get comfortable with that, we move fast.
Name a sacred cow in defense tech that you think will be proven false.
I do not believe that over the next 15 to 20 years, there are going to be tens and tens of IPOs in the defense tech realm. And maybe that's counter to my interests, but I also try to be realistic. Structurally, we cannot have one, two, three, four, $5 billion outcomes list on the NYSE or the Nasdaq, and then hope for a 2x multiple. And this isn't SaaS. There are other sectors, there are other segments, there are other industries for which that playbook works, which gets to then the flip side of, okay, so we're going to have massive gargantuan outcomes with some of these companies by definition. And this is the only market that I understand exists with literally line item by line item definitions of how large the addressable market is within the United States. Is we know what the market can support, we know the companies that are out there, we know the products that they're building, and we know the appropriations and designated monies for those companies building those capabilities. We know the incumbents, and then we can kind of gauge who is doing a good job displacing them and who is not. And because of that, I think for any serious VC, they need to evaluate defense tech through the lens of, again, there's going to be 8, 10, 12 winners over the next decade, 15 years. This could, again, with a caveat, be if Anduril performed exceptionally well, which I believe will most certainly be the case in public markets, that maybe that's a catalyst for other IPOs. But absent that catalyst forming, naturally and organically, these companies take some time to achieve that breakout momentum, and inertia is a hell of a force. So just be prepared, and set your portfolio construction accordingly to invest in winners time and time again, especially if they're in your portfolio, as opposed to diversification. Diversification is the enemy of alpha in defense tech.
So do you think, I mean, I am going to ask a question. That's a little depressing. If you're a defense tech founder, what is success?
So if you're raising venture dollars, what I just said is true with respect to venture capitalists and the rates of return that they are looking for. There will be plenty of middle market and SMB outcomes here. And if you as a founder raise one round of capital, two rounds of capital with aligned investors, and you exit your company for 100 million, 200 million, $500 million, those are great outcomes, and they're exceptional for the founding teams. And if the investors have the correct expectations, it's great for them. That's not what Silent Ventures looks for, but that doesn't mean that that's not a win. And that doesn't mean there won't be a lot of those outcomes. So founders can still be bullish in pursuing whatever ambitions they have.
There we go. Biggest funding gap in defense tech right now.
Electronic warfare capabilities, because I do not think you can take out a whole bunch of Group One and FPV drones kinetically without some major breakthrough that I'm unaware of. Why Leonidas from Epirus is not deployed at hundreds of forward operating bases around the globe is beyond me. But conversely, I think we've been very asleep at the wheel investing in Group One drones and the absolute critical affordable mass that we need there in the tens of millions of units at minimum to impact the future battlefield. And so I think there are plenty of investors that are making bets there. I would be highly appreciative of the DOW actually contracting, enabling those companies to be extremely successful.
Awesome. Well, Jackson, this has been a blast. Thanks so much for joining. If people want to get in touch with you, pitch something to you, how best would they do that?
Warm intros are the best way. We're very fortunate to have people reach out on Twitter, LinkedIn, cold email, stuff like that. I candidly, like, I get too much stuff in my inboxes to be able to evaluate that. So people who know me and trust me, and that trust is vice versa, it's a very good way to get a meeting with Silent Ventures. But also, persistence pays off. So if for some reason I don't see something, I don't respond to it, doesn't mean that I have a grudge or that I'm trying to be difficult. Yeah, sell me. And I was a salesman prior. I'm still selling to some degree, and you might just very well hear from us.
Awesome. Well, great conversation. I appreciate taking the time and look forward to meeting you in person.
Yeah, Dave, thanks so much for having me.